Larken Rose. He is now a Porcfest veteran, and he's built a name for himself as one of the best communicators of these ideas. A lot of people think that you need to, use huge diction, try to outsmart your, just try to sound as nerdy as possible. But really, the key as to be a good writer and a good speaker is to break things down and simplify them. And he is one of these people who just knows how to do it and get to it and crystallize it so that people go home and they remember and they take these ideas with them. So I'm very proud to have him on our stage. Thank you.
I'm going to do this without notes. I think it's fair to say that most of the people at Porcfest, their goal is to have a society without violence, a society based on peaceful, voluntary interaction. And quite often I find that I end up doing videos and giving talks having to do with the use of physical force. And it makes a lot of people squirm. And this talk is called Why Speak of Violence, and it's about why I think we have to discuss it. And we have to bring up this topic for exactly the same reason that we don't want to, for exactly the same reason that makes people uncomfortable. Now, quite a while ago, I wrote an article called When Should You Shoot a Cop?, which, as you could probably guess, made lots of people freak out. And the article began by saying the title of this article is going to make lots of people freak out, and lots of people won't even read it. They'll just have a tantrum. And then lots of people proceeded to have a tantrum without reading it, making the article come true. And then later I recorded the article as a narration, and then the guys at copblock.org made a cool video to go along with it. And so they posted that and offended a bunch of new people. Now, so many people, and for anybody who wants to go find the article and read it, I highly encourage it. I'm not even going to go through that right now. The reason people have a tantrum at the title is the reason I wrote the article and the reason I talk about these things. Imagine if I wrote an article called When Should You Shoot a Carjacker? Would anybody have a tantrum? No. Now, some people might say, well, I would rather give someone my car than kill him. Okay. But I bet they wouldn't have a tantrum seeing that title. Now, even if I wrote an article called When Should You Shoot Your Plumber? People would probably say, what? Why on earth would you do that? But I bet people still wouldn't have a tantrum. The reason they have a tantrum at the title, When Should You Shoot a Cop? Is because we are all trained to imagine that a human being with a uniform and a badge is not a human being. He's something special. He's something magical. He's something you don't resist because he is authority. So he's not bound by morality, and you should never even consider for a second lifting a finger to resist him. You can complain, that's okay. You can vote, that's okay. You can petition, you can whine, you can beg while he's bludgeoning you and tasering you and fun things like that. You can petition for a change in legislation, but don't you dare resist. And the topic I want to talk about today is why we absolutely have to talk about the right to resist, even if you don't do it. Even if out of self-preservation, you do what the guy with the badge and the gun says because you would rather not be dead. Even if you go along, even if you cooperate, even if you obey, every step of the way, if we cannot talk about the concept and the principle involved, then we don't get anywhere. Now, a lot of people will say, well, violence isn't the answer to this problem. It kind of depends what you mean by this problem. Yes, the problem of statism cannot be solved by brute force. And for some reason, people read my article and they say, so you're for revolution? No. It doesn't say a word about revolution, and I'm not for that because it doesn't fix the problem. Now, when you talk about what's the answer to the problem, it depends what problem you're talking about. I mean, a lot of people say violence is never the answer. If the question is, What do I do about this axe murderer that just broke in my front door at 2 in the morning? The answer is violence. Do whatever it takes to make him not able to kill you with an axe. The underlying problem that there might be somebody in the world who thinks he ought to come into your house and kill you with an axe, it doesn't actually treat that problem. It only treats the symptom, to shoot the axe murderer. However, in that case, it's pretty darn important to treat that symptom. In the same way, talk about forcible resistance to the state, it doesn't fix the underlying problem. The underlying problem is the belief in authority and government and statism, and you can't shoot that belief away. Now, there is a crossover, though, that if we don't understand the underlying principle, if we can't talk about this issue, then we don't get to the underlying problem, which is the belief in authority and government. Now, so many people, the reason they want government is they look out at the world and say, I don't know that I trust everybody. I don't know all these people. I don't know what they have in mind. We need a system that will magically make sure that none of those bad people hurt me. So we need this all-powerful government with lots of guns, and they can write laws, and they can forcibly control all of us, because all those people out there, I don't know all of them. I don't know what they're up to. I don't know what their motives are. I want a system to protect me. So we're going to build this giant, powerful thing and give it bombers and tanks and tons of mercenaries. And gosh darn it, it turned around and stomped on me and stole my money. Well, we need a slightly different system of a big, all-powerful thing. We need a democracy. Oh, no. Now we need a dictatorship. Now we need a constitutional republic. The reason people want a giant system is they want a guarantee that the good guys will win. Here's the problem with that. If they look out at the world, if 90% of the people really were malicious and nasty and heartless, who's going to run the system? Malicious, nasty, heartless people. Arranging things differently doesn't make people good. However, telling somebody you have authority and you have the right to rule me will make them do bad things. But people so much want that guarantee. How are you going to, people often ask, well, without government, how are you going to guarantee nobody's going to take my stuff? One, I'm not. Two, I guarantee you if there's a government, it will take your stuff. Every government in the history of the world has taken the stuff of the people it claim to protect. So you can either fall for the politicians and say, I'll protect you. I guarantee they will rob you. They always do. They always have. But people so much want that promise of a master plan to protect them from the bad guys. Because there are bad guys out there. Now, a lot of people assume that because I don't believe in government at all, oh, you must trust everybody. I wouldn't have one of these if I trusted everybody. It's not that I magically trust everybody. I probably trust most people, but it's because I least trust the people who say, give me power over you and I'll make things better. That does not solve the problem. Now, here is the rude reality that people don't want to admit. Even a lot of pro-freedom people don't want to admit. There's no magical system that makes us safe. What is it that determines whether the good guys win or the bad guys win? Whether oppression reigns or freedom and justice reign? Very simply, if the good guys are better at using physical violence than the bad guys, justice wins. If the bad guys are better at it, evil wins. Might doesn't make right, but might does make outcome. And an example I like to use of people who say, well, you need a democracy to protect us from this. Imagine you're stuck on an island with 100 really nasty people. Complete sociopaths, no respect for you. What arrangement do you think is going to make them be nice to you? Well, if we vote for somebody, yeah, they're going to vote for a bad guy to stomp on you. Well, if we have a constitutional republic, they're going to write, we have the power to stomp on you, and then they're going to vote people to go into the republic and legislate that they get to stomp on you. Whatever the system is, whatever the law is, the good people have to have more ability. They have to be better at using force than the bad guys. And this is a topic that a lot of good people don't like to talk about, because our goal, obviously, is to have a world where there isn't all that violence going on, where we don't even need to defend ourselves because it hardly ever happens. Here's the problem with that. You know, the people who say, and I have some of the people I have the most respect for still do this. And they still say, well, no, we got to get the ideas right, and we have to get people to understand and accept voluntarism, and which is all true, but let's not talk about violence. Here's the problem. Let's say everybody in here, except one person, we don't know who you are right now, is perfectly good and kind and charitable and won't initiate violence, and they're all pacifists. But there's one bad person who's armed and who isn't a pacifist. Guess who wins? The one guy willing to use force. Because one person willing to use force against 100 who aren't wins. On the other hand, if you have one guy who will use force who will initiate violence and use it for evil, and one guy who will use it defensively, good might win. Now, there are a bunch of levels of force, like the axe murderer breaking into your house. Shooting him is a pretty effective way to make him stop killing you with an axe. You might be able to knock him out. You might be able to run and hide. You might be able to lock him in a closet. All of those are in the category of using force. You're not trying to talk him into anything. You're not, okay, I'm going to give you the fastest psychological counseling session ever to try to fix your disorder. It's to impose something on him without his will, or to stop him from imposing it on you, but using force to stop him. And quite simply, whatever people think, whatever system there is, whatever the majority thinks, if the bad people, the people willing to commit aggression, are better at using force than the good people, evil wins. Nothing else matters. The Constitution doesn't do a damn thing. You can wave it at the jackboot who's about to beat the tar out of you. Unless you have a really thick printing of the Constitution that you can use as a shield, it won't do a damn thing. Now, I would love to live in a world where the good people didn't need to have the ability or the willingness to use brute force. And I don't mind if half the people aren't willing to and aren't able to, as long as enough of the good people are to stop the bad guys. Because that's kind of the problem. The bad guys, by definition, are the people who don't mind initiating violence against the rest of us. And the strange thing is how many good people think a system is the answer and don't want to admit that there is no guarantee. There is nothing you can do. There's no document, there's no arrangement that will magically guarantee that the good guys win. But that's what people want government for. It never ever does that, but that's what they want it for. The only thing that actually guarantees it is if the good people are better at using force than the bad people. And so allow me to beat up on Gandhi, as if I didn't offend enough people already. Yeah, he won't stop me. Figuratively speaking. Now, I understand, now Gandhi is actually misunderstood, so first I'll defend him and then I'll beat him up. He's often misunderstood. A lot of people talked about your passive resistance. He said, oh, there's nothing passive about what I do. And the word pacifist does not come from passive. It comes from the word for peace. Passive is, I'm just going to sit around and see what you do. And Gandhi said, that is not me. I get in their face and disobey and let them beat the tar out of me. However, he and a lot of other people, and first of all, I understand the approach of saying, well, I'm just going to sit here, you're going to beat the tar out of me, and I'm going to hope that lots of people are watching and say, wow, you just beat the tar out of that guy who wasn't even resisting, and they'll figure out you're the bad guy. Now, I guess there's some propaganda value in that, and in some cases when your choices are get slaughtered or have that happen, maybe that's a better choice. But when people say, I'm against violence, I'm nonviolent, so I would never resist, what Gandhi did led to a huge amount of violence. A huge amount. And all of it was in one direction. The aggressors against the innocent. if you like watch the movie about his life and you watch them, the law enforcers beating the tar out of the people, making their own clothes or getting their own salt from the sea, and the result was lots and lots of violence. So to say, I don't resist because I'm against violence, well, violence happened anyway. The lack of resistance, all it did was make sure all of the violence was evil. All of the force was aggression against innocent people. And personally, if somebody has to get bludgeoned over the head, I would rather it be the guy who is going to commit aggression instead of his victim. Now, I know a lot of people, I know a bunch of people who are pacifists and say, I wouldn't resist at all. I don't want a gun because I'm not going to resist at all. No matter what somebody's doing to me, I would rather let them do it. And, oh, here's one of my least things. I won't sink to their level. It is not sinking to their level to use defensive force to protect yourself. It is not sinking to the level of the aggressor. The only way you can sink to their level is if somebody attacks you and you run out the door and go attack somebody else. That's their level. Defending yourself is not their level. And to blur that distinction as if any use of force is morally equal, whether it's aggressive or defensive, that's just offensive to me. Nice pun by accident. To pretend that they're the same thing, that you're taking yourself down to their level. Now I know a bunch of pacifists who say, well, I would just let them beat me up, whether it's the cops or a private crook or whatever. I would rather do that than forcibly harm another human being. Okay, in your own case, you own yourself. If you want to sit there and let someone beat the tar out of you, I won't bother to argue with it too much. However, if you're going to stand there and do nothing while the bad guy beats the tar out of the guy next to you, or the child next to you, or the woman next to you, the innocent person next to you, to me, that is absolute cowardice. And if I offend some people, I don't care. Because, remember the equation, the outcome is determined by whether the good people are better at using force than the bad people. And if we let the bad people commit aggression and nothing happens to them, nobody resists, who do you think wins every time? Good guess. I was hoping everybody could figure that out without saying it, but okay. So that's my beating up Gandhi a little bit. Because another thing that his actions reinforced. Now, Gandhi was a statist. He believed in law. He was a lawyer, actually. He believed in law. He just thought, well, that law is bad, so we're going to disobey. They'll beat the tar out of us, and hopefully they'll change the law. Or we want to be oppressed by Indian rulers instead of by British rulers. Like, really? That's your great achievement? To change the color of the skin of the people stomping on you? So he was totally still a statist, and there's a problem with, now I'm going to offend some more people, most kinds of civil disobedience. Now, I know and hugely admire a lot of people who do civil disobedience. Now, this is a thing that it isn't necessarily a result of civil disobedience, but it's definitely a risk. When Gandhi goes to, all right, we're going to lead a gazillion people to the sea to get our own salt, and they're going to beat the tar out of us, that sort of implies that we are disobeying the master so that he's going to beat the tar out of us and we're going to let him. It actually reinforces the idea that the master has the right to rule. Because if Gandhi and his buddies were going to the sea and somebody just came up and said, I'm just going to beat you up and steal your stuff, I don't work for the government, I just kind of want to rob you, would he have reacted the same way? Now, he might have. So it's not necessarily his intention to give the impression that he's legitimizing the oppression, but it can come across that way. And a lot of civil disobedience comes out looking that way, where somebody goes, I'm going to come disobey you, then you're going to take me hostage and put me in a cage. And I understand why, in a lot of ways, that can do some good and make people say, wow, this is insane that you just got put in a cage for having the wrong plant or something. At the same time, I think it often reinforces the idea that we will come and disobey, but then we'll let you do whatever you want to us. And I think that's a huge PR problem, because it actually creates the image that, yeah, we can go disobey the teacher, but then we hold out our hand and she hits it with a ruler because she's the authority and we're acknowledging her right to rule. And now one way to get around that is when people don't help. Like they do civil disobedience and they say, well, you can arrest me, but you have to carry me out. I'm not going to help you with my own effort. So there are little ways to try to make that message not come across, but too often it looks like, okay, I submit to your authority. And that's the last thing in the world that should happen. I also don't particularly like the thing of going to the masters, going in front of them and disobeying, as opposed to just ignoring the psychos. Because it gives them attention, it gives them an air of importance. Like, instead of going in front of the Capitol building and smoking, how about if you all stay home and smoke pot? It's less trouble, isn't it? And so, but that's just sort of has to do with how it comes across and how it registers in other people's heads. But when you get to the base issue, again, getting back to the idea of forcibly resisting government aggression, the cop with the badge, he is a human being, nothing else. Morality applies to him exactly the same as it does to everybody else. Trouble is, most of the world's been trained to not understand that obvious truth. So that when the cop comes and tries to literally, physically take someone hostage for smoking the wrong plant, a lot of people will say, well, you deserved it. You smoked the wrong plant. The politicians told you aren't allowed to do that. Wait, let me get my beer. They said you're not allowed to smoke that. You disobeyed, so it's okay for a guy to put you in a cage. That is the idea we have to break. Here is why we have to be able and willing to talk about the use of physical violence against the state. Not as a revolution, not as revenge, not as punishment, as self-defense. Because if our message to the world is, we own ourselves, we should be free, but when the king's guards come, we will obey. The only message that gets out there is, we will obey. They are our rightful Lord and Master. We will do as they say. Because necessary to the idea of self-ownership is the idea of the right of self-defense. Now again, there are lots of reasons why a lot of people, including me, will go along with oppression rather than resisting. And my article, When Should You Shoot a Cop, says often it's a really bad idea in practical terms, even if you have every moral right to do it. And going along out of self-preservation to avoid being tasered or killed or caged or whatever is perfectly rational. But if we don't get people to understand that they own themselves and that means nobody has the right to aggress against them, nobody, that no law, no constitution, no election, no badge, no fancy uniform, no law enforcement can give anybody the right to aggress against them. And if no one has the right to aggress against them, that means if someone tries, they have the right to defend themselves. And this is the last step that a lot of people have trouble with, including a lot of people in the freedom movement, because it has taken years and years and years to train us into the authoritarian mindset, which says, do as you're told, never disobey. Now, how many people here know of the Milgram experiments? Yeehaw. See, I wish the whole country would answer that many. Then we'd be in good shape. Really short version for people who don't know. It was basically a psychology experiment to see how many people would inflict severe pain or death on a complete stranger simply because an authority figure told them to. Now, they had to sort of trick the people who volunteered into the study and not tell them what it was about. And you can read all about what it was online. And I highly recommend the book, Obedience to Authority, which is Stanley Milgram's book about his own experiments. But the punchline is 2/3 of Americans will inflict severe pain or death on a complete stranger who wasn't even accused of doing anything wrong if an authority figure told them to. And what's particularly creepy to me is when the experiment was described to people who hadn't taken it, people hugely overestimate their ability to resist authority. Almost everybody says, I would stop. When it got bad, I would stand my ground and say, no, sir, I will not do that. That's what Americans think they are. What 2/3 of them really are is people who will kill a complete stranger if authority tells them to. And it's very telling in the experiments. Again, I won't get into the details, even though it's amazing and really important. While it's using an electric zapping machine, they think they're electrocuting another human being. While doing that, the subjects would often tremble and cry and beg to be allowed to stop. So they knew it was wrong. They weren't just waiting for an excuse to zap some stranger. They knew it was wrong. They begged to be allowed to stop, but all the authority figure would have to say is, nope, must continue. And 2/3 of Americans will continue all the way to the point where the person at the other end is feigning unconsciousness or death. Given the fact that most people are so programmed that they are physically unable to say no, they are physically unable to disobey an authority figure, it shouldn't come as a surprise that when you bring up the idea of forcibly resisting authority, not just disobeying, not just sitting there and doing nothing, which 2/3 of Americans can't even just sit there and do nothing. I mean, wow, how much does it take to sit there and do nothing? But 2/3 of Americans, when an authority figure says, zap that person, they can't sit there and do nothing. So it shouldn't be that much of a surprise when somebody says, don't just sit there and do nothing. It's your job to get up and go stop that authority figure from hurting somebody else. Obviously, that makes people very uncomfortable. The thing is, it's the right of self-defense is inexorably linked, I can almost say that word, to the concept of self-ownership. And the thing is, when people are talking about, well, we want to win people over to freedom, and if you talk about shooting cops, it kind of freaks people out. I say, yeah, it does freak people out because they've been trained into authoritarianism, and they believe that if a guy attacks you with a badge, it's not okay to resist. If anybody else does, it is okay to resist. But the guy with the badge, no, never do that. But my question is, what are you trying to win people over to? If you're trying to win people over to actual freedom and understanding self-ownership, you kind of can't leave out the fact that you have the right to defend yourself. And that politician scribbles and badges don't change that. Because if you leave that out, you're winning them over to a position that is completely freaking worthless. Which is, we should be free unless authority tells us not to be. Most people who call themselves pro-freedom people, that is what they believe. And you can hear it when they say, well, I would never advocate breaking the law. Then please get out of the way of the people who actually believe in freedom. Because there's a hell of a lot of evil that has been perpetrated in the name of the law. If you're over in Nazi Germany saying, I believe in justice, but I would never break the law, well then shut up and get out of the way and let the people who actually believe in freedom try to achieve it. Because saying we have to work within the system, we have to obey the law, we have to obey authority, playing that game is starting by surrendering. It's starting the debate by saying, I acknowledge that you are my Lord and Master, Mr. Government, that I cannot disobey your laws, that I cannot resist your mercenaries, and after that, I'd like to beg for freedom, please. One, it doesn't ever work. And two, it is a complete lack of principle. That is anti-freedom. It's exactly the same, an analogy I often use, as a slave going to his master and saying, Master, I know you're my rightful owner, but, and then after the but, he spends a half hour giving this eloquent, heartfelt speech about why he should be free. All the master heard was, I know you're my rightful master. Good, glad you know that, shut up and get back to work. When the message to those with badges or those in Congress is, We would never disobey you, but we just really want, they don't care what comes after that. They know you are their slave. You just told them that you're their slave, that you will obey them forever, no matter what they do, that you will never resist their enforcers. Why would they care what comes after that? I know I'm your slave, but can I please? No, you can't. Shut up. Sit down. The only consistent moral message is, I own myself, each of you own yourself. None of us have an obligation to put up with aggression from anybody. Now, I knew there'd be an undercover pig here. That was a chicken? That was a pig dressed as a chicken. So it matters a lot what message we're spreading. And yes, the correct message makes people very uncomfortable because it goes to the underlying belief in authority, and they don't like that because they've always been trained to measure their own goodness on how well they did as they were told and obeyed authority. They get it from their parents almost all the time. They get it from their teachers. You sit there and do what you're told, Johnny. They get it from the media. They get it from the government. They get it from everywhere. And if you come along and say you're not beholden to those people, you own yourself, and that means they don't have the right to aggress against you, and if they try, you have the right to defend yourself. That is a paradigm-smashing idea, and it makes people really uncomfortable. And it made me really uncomfortable for many years. But if we don't get to that point, if we aren't actually consistently promoting self-ownership, which includes the right of self-defense, then what are we going for? What is the point? How far can you get? The best you can get is we're obedient, polite slaves who really know how to ask for freedom. We don't ever get it, but we're really good at asking for it. That should not be good enough. Which means to get to that point, we have to step past the comfort zone, our own comfort zone, and the comfort zone of 7 billion people, or however many we're up to, who have been trained to be subservient to authority. They have to understand, yeah, you might want to obey to avoid being tasered or killed. A lot of the time, you do not ever have an obligation to allow another human being to commit aggression against you. You have every right to defend yourself and anybody else. Whether it's practically a good idea, that's a different question. Morally, the police have no right to commit aggression in any case where anybody else doesn't, which means never. So does anybody want to throw tomatoes at me or lynch me or have a question or a comment or a bad word? I heard we have, oh, okay. It has a switch somewhere.
Hi, I'm Fari, and on Thursday I'm going to give a talk about civil obedience and why you too, like me, should become a cheese-eating surrender monkey. and why I will preach that you should surrender to the state. At the same time, I want to say in advance that none of what I'm going to say contradicts what Larken Rose has said here.
I did see that on the schedule and thought,
but still, I will convince you too to surrender to the state and be cheese-eating surrender monkeys.
All right. Well, you and 7 billion other people, but for a slightly different reason, I expect.
Possibly. So Thursday at 11 in the next tent. Thank you.
Woohoo! Any other comments, questions, insults, threats? Incidentally, are you a question? Or are you storming the stage?
I think I have a question, but it's not well formulated. I guess part of it is you're here and you're trying to convince people, and I agree with you for the most part. If we're talking about self-ownership, how, when you're trying to convince people to believe in self-ownership, how does that not ultimately become collectivist? And let me explain. So cops will argue, they have the thin blue line, right? And they're like, oh, okay, we're kind of a gang. And I think in some ways, and we should edit this part out for the video, so this is just live right here at Porcfest X. We become a gang, right? But we're a gang of people who believe in self-defense and self-ownership. But even those concepts in some way are collectivist. So I look at New Hampshire and I look at what we're doing with the Free State Project, and I have to deal with cops. And there's that whole thing. In fact, on Saturday, they did a conference that dealt for 4 hours that they refused to open to the public on how do we deal with anti-police groups in New Hampshire. And I was like, I want to go to that. I want to know what you're saying, and I want to talk to you about it because that seems like a good thing. I'm not sure where my question is in that.
Me neither.
But it's sort of this idea of, okay, if you know, we have millions of individuals saying we believe in self-ownership, I think before we get to that point, we're going to be in a sort of gangland point at some point from a moral perspective, right? And we have good and truth and principle on our side, I like to think, and they kind of have the wrong incentives. But how do we make those things work together?
Well, if I understand the question, which I don't, the concepts of self-ownership and the non-aggression principle and the right to defend yourself doesn't actually have anything to do with numbers, whether it's one person or 100 people saying it. The rules don't change based on how many numbers of people say it. Whereas the myth of democracy is, hey, if most of the people in this room decide to kill the minority, well, then it's perfectly fine because the majority wanted it. So the excuses for the government gang always make up an exemption for morality, whereas the concept of self-ownership and non-aggression principle says the rule of morality, which is pretty darn simple, is the same for everybody at all times, whether it's one person or a zillion. If 1,000 people vote to kill one person who didn't harm anybody, the 1,000 people are wrong, and the one has the right to defend himself. Now, on a practical level, good luck with that. But they have the right. So it's basically just applying basic morality that most people understand already, applying it to everybody, with and without badges, with or without politician scribbles. So it's just saying morality applies to everybody. And in most other circumstances, people would say, yeah, if somebody's attacking you, you have the right to defend yourself. But people have been trained to think, oh, he has a badge? No, no, no. You just humbly submit and let him do whatever he wants to you. And that's what has to go. And until that goes, we shouldn't even pretend to be pro-freedom. And yeah, people are going to be offended, especially the state mercenaries who really and truly believe that they have rights that we don't. And I recently made a video of a chat I had back and forth with a cop in the comments section under the video, when should you shoot a cop? Which was very telling. I won't go through it all now. But basically said, well, I'm one of the good cops, and 2 minutes later he was wishing me to die a horrible death in public. So that one's worth watching. It was fun. Obviously, they won't react well to the news that they're just people and don't have extra rights and that we have the right to defend ourselves against them. But if they don't hear it from us, they're not going to hear it anywhere else. And I want them to understand the truth, too, so they can stop being evil thugs and join the human race.
Hi, I want to thank you for an entertaining discussion and a very thought-provoking one at the same time. And I agree entirely on the moral ground. It is black and white. I agree you do not have an obligation to stand down. I believe you do have a right to defend yourself. But I'm a little hesitant to get on board with you completely, because I think on a certain level it is kind of a numbers game. Our movement is not in the majority. We have a moral argument to make with the general public to get people on board. You know, it's kind of a PR position at this point. In other words, if you have 4 people that are willing to stand up and shoot a cop in the absolute extreme circumstance and actually take that action,
it won't go well for them.
Yeah, you're going to have 4 dead people.
Yeah.
If you have 4 million people that are willing to take that position, then you're going to get some, then you've reached, somewhere in the middle is a critical mass where the society is saying, okay, maybe this is something we're going to talk about. And that's part of what we're doing here, but I think in order for it to have, some kind of greater impact, we need to make the moral argument in a bigger, in a bigger picture way, to the more get a greater proportion of the whole of society on board with that position and willing and able to ask that question and debate it like we're doing here.
Yeah, and I actually should have covered that better here. It's a thing I've covered elsewhere but didn't cover it as well here. The two stages, the right of self-defense applies, like I said, if it's one person against 1,000 aggressors, the right applies, but in a practical sense, he's kind of doomed. And just like what you're saying, in a numbers game, if 90% of the country thinks it's perfectly okay for a guy with a badge to beat the tar out of you, and the 10% say, we're going to resist, bad things probably happen to 10%. So the one thing is getting enough people on board that resisting works. And again, in a practical sense, I don't resist, which is why I'm still here to talk to you today. I've gone along with a whole bunch of garbage, including having my home invaded by fascists and being stuck in a cage for a year. And when my home was invaded by fascists, I had the machinery to kill them all. And I left it in the safe, and I let them in. It's also because I don't really want to kill another human being, even if it's justified. So I'll go pretty far to avoid doing that. But the practical question, like if it's one person, he's doomed. And as the number grows, it becomes more likely that resisting on a practical level will work. But that's why I say the practical question of we got to go along with it because they'll just kill us is a completely separate thing of saying, because you could blatantly say to a cop, and I've said this, if you come to my house with a lot of people with guns, I'll probably submit. You'll still be the evil bastard. I would still have had the right to kill all of you if you're the aggressors and the only way to stop you is to kill you. But if I don't have the ability and I'm just going to die, I'll let you get away with being a Nazi thug. And even they love it when I speak so gently to them. But even getting that message out to say, we will submit because right now our other option is death, but we will still spread the idea of self-ownership, and someday we will be able to resist. And even if it's not in my lifetime, the thing is we have to win people over to the point where they know they have the right to resist, because winning people over to where they'll just sort of cry and beg isn't winning anything in my book.
I think just one more thing. I think the funny thing is Gandhi probably did have the numbers. If he had chosen to use them, he could have overthrown, well, not a revolutionary sense, but he could have established that as something that's acceptable. That it is all right to defend ourselves.
Yeah, I doubt we'll ever know, but I do think that if he had said just forcibly resist when they show up, less people would have suffered had he done that. And this is sort of a guess because I wasn't there and I don't know all the details, but from what I do know, it seems like that would work. Now, in Gandhi's, to his credit, he did say, if your choices are be a coward and use force, use force. Do not use passive resistance, or don't be a pacifist just because you're a chicken. Like, do it out of principle. It would be better to violently resist than just be a coward and run away. So he did say that, but all right. Next.
Yeah, in the 80s and 90s, I hung out with people who were in the peace movement, and they would do things like stand in front of munitions trains and go trespass at the Nevada weapons test site, and they would then, orderly get arrested. Okay, and this was their way of using their bodies to say, you do not do this in my name. The problem was, though, as you pointed out, they always acknowledged that they were subservient to those in authority. And I think the point is, very clear that, all of this peace movement stuff was done, and do we have peace today?
Not yet.
Not yet, right. So unless we do recognize that there is no legitimate authority, and that we don't just go quietly and condescend, or we don't say to ourselves that there is someone who has legitimate authority over us, and we don't acknowledge that, yes, you are our masters. Listening to the reaction to the civil disobedience in New Hampshire, I know people in Keene get a lot of flack for disobedience, and it's interesting how a lot of the critics of the civil disobedience in New Hampshire are of the variety that, well, they want to go disobey, but they don't want to take the comeuppance they're going to get when they do it, and they're immature. And it's like, no. They're not, in my view, because they are at least putting it out there that no one is my master. And you may not approve of me smoking dope or doing whatever you call silly thing out in Keene, but the fact is that at least there's people who are saying, no, I control my body. As long as I harm no one else, I should have the right to purport myself as I see fit, and no one has the right to aggress against me. And I think that is the ultimate point.
Absolutely. And a lot of people claiming to be pro-freedom bash that because they still view it as a sin to disobey the state. And as long as we think that, we're just kind of doomed. As a quick thought of, the idea of disobeying and standing on a military base and getting in the way, there were a lot of draft dodgers, which for some reason people still think is an insult. You wouldn't go murder complete strangers when politicians told you to. What is wrong with you? And I think, what if instead of all those people who burned their cards and said, take me to jail, they burn their cards and say, if you come to take me hostage for not committing murder for you, I do know how to shoot a gun. And if you're going to cage me for not being a hired killer, I'll demonstrate my ability to kill for you. Vietnam War would have ended about 5 minutes after it started. Fragging, modern fragging. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
My question is, do you think that Gandhi was not successful, or in getting what he wanted, or that MLK was not successful, or is that what you're
saying? India is not free and never has been. He did hugely inconvenience the British Empire, which I think was cool, and he stopped a certain level of injustice. So to me, I would say he definitely accomplished some good stuff. The question is, the cost of the way he did it. Did it have to be that big a cost to get rid of the British? And I would refer to the what's his name, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Did I get that even remotely close to right? Who wrote Gulag Archipelago? Who wrote the famous quote about, we all just kind of went along and then we're in the prison camps thinking, why didn't we resist just a little bit? If every once in a while one of their agents came to one of our houses and didn't go home, Stalin's machine would have gone and been gone. But we all just went along. So applying that to Gandhi, if a tenth of the number of the people just said, don't try to hit us because we'll hit back, I think it may have ended British rule a lot faster. And then if they turned around and said, yeah, we don't even want people who look like us oppressing us, then they might actually be free. So yeah, I do think he accomplished a lot in terms of crippling British control of India, kind of for a while, but it didn't result in freedom because it was just sort of arguing over who the authority would be, and I think it could have been done at a lower cost if they had been willing to resist.
Is that different than revolution, or how is that different than revolution?
Well, see, to me, the idea of revolution is we're going to come get you and overthrow you. And I don't advocate that, first of all, because a lot of people would die needlessly and it would accomplish nothing. Because as long as the people of the country are statists, they'll just build another one. So to me, there's a huge difference between, and this is just sort of the connotation to me, that the term revolution is like, we're going to come overthrow you, as opposed to self-defense. Like, I can't say, I'm going to come over there and defend myself against you. It just doesn't really make any sense. But to say, if you come commit aggression against me, we will protect ourselves, to me that's different than we're going to go do something to the state. Is we're going to mind our own business, and when they come for us, we have the right to defend ourselves.
Since they're constantly coming and taking money away from us and all of that stuff, if any level of resistance against all of that, then it's a constant battle, and I feel like then that is what a revolution would be, wouldn't it? Or no? I mean, since if we resist everything.
Well, again, it's a huge numbers game. I mean, if tomorrow, by some miracle, half the country said, yeah, we don't want to play for your war anymore, and 100 million Americans said, yeah, we're not filing and paying anymore, it wouldn't even take a revolution. They could just be ignored out of power. As the number gets smaller, the state gets more able to violently crush the resistance. And And in some cases, it can end up looking like revolution because, hey, there's people shooting each other. That kind of falls in the definition of revolution. But the mentality, I think, the mentality of free people will never be, we're going to go do something to the state to make it be what we want it to be. It can only be, when you come attack us, we're going to stop you. And if people are shooting each other, it may kind of look the same. But there's a huge difference in mentality of we're going to come attack you because we don't like you, and don't come attack us because we will defend ourselves. So, yeah.
I live in Baltimore, so I talk to a lot of people in like the urban communities about liberty and freedom-oriented stuff because they are on board with us a lot more than people would think. And I thought what you were saying would resonate with them quite a bit. Have you like reached out to that type of community? Have you gotten input from that type of community on that type of thing or not?
Yeah, it's fun to, I mean, I haven't made it a point to go out of my way, but what I love about like the comment section in YouTube, you know, sort of the dregs of discussion in the US, but the reason I think it's important, the reason I still go there and I still debate people is because you get all different people from all different backgrounds and all different communities. And I do see, like, there's a lot of people in the city who have the attitude of, I hate cops, kill all cops. And I would rather they narrow it and understand the piece of righteousness in that, because there's a huge piece of righteousness in that. If you're some black kid who grew up his whole life watching white guys with uniforms come into your neighborhood and oppress everybody you know, of course you're going to say, those are the evil guys, I wish somebody would shoot them. And they have a huge reason to think that. The trouble is, if it stays vague as sort of like, I just hate those people, and they don't understand why their position really is righteous, which is you own yourself, they're violating your self-ownership. The fact that they have a badge doesn't matter. The fact that they're white and you're black doesn't matter. The color doesn't matter, the race doesn't matter. The badge doesn't even matter. The aggression is all that matters. And so I think there's a whole lot of righteous indignation of people who have been stomped on by cops, a lot of different minority groups. And if they can, and I do know a whole lot of them are now into the philosophy of freedom and get why, yeah, this actually means it makes sense. I mean, Malcolm X is a pretty obvious example. And he freaked people out by saying, well, duh, if the cops attack us, we have the right to defend ourselves. How could you say that? And so he was already saying that. Now, he admitted that he was racist for quite a while, I think until he went to Mecca and said, hey, look, white and black people getting along just fine. Maybe it's not about race. And then afterwards, I agreed with almost everything he said because he just voiced the same thing. Hey, if they attack us, we don't have an obligation to let them. But even a lot of black people and a whole lot of white people said, how could you talk about resisting law enforcement? But yeah, so there's a lot of people who have gotten it a lot worse than, I have and most of the people here have. But I think they have to, I would love for them to get a perfectly clear view of the problem and the sin and the solution so that it isn't just anger and hatred. And, when I was in a cage for a year for not sending pieces of paper to the IRS, 70 to 80% of the people in there were black. Most of them for having the wrong substance on them. Some of them argued with me that they should be in prison for having the wrong substance while I was trying to tell them, no, you shouldn't. Yeah. And so there really is, and then a lot of people understood that it was wrong, and a lot were just, some were like, they planted evidence on me and they lied about this in court, and I said, well, what about the underlying thing that they think they have the right to put you in a cage because you had a substance they don't approve of? I don't know, it's against the law. So I think everybody needs their thoughts clarified to the point where they really know the goal, because it isn't just kill Whitey. Like, kill Whitey doesn't really fix it.
So you get the point in the education that I'm trying to do with
Absolutely.
Because that's what I'm trying to do, is to get them to be like, it's not the white man,
right.
It's the man, if you want to go that far.
Right, you call it
so
the
like,
man.
I just feel like there's a lot that could be done in that area. And
Yeah.
I don't feel like enough people are trying hard enough is all I was saying. And what you were saying today, I think I could, twist around a little bit and get them to listen a little bit.
Yeah, there's a hell of a lot of righteous indignation and anger there. And if it was mixed with understanding, so they get why it's wrong and what they have the right to do about it. Yeah, because anytime there's a major victim class, they're probably the ones who are willing to stand up for what's right. Because, the people who have an easy life, and Thomas Jefferson talked about this, if we're rich and we have a pretty easy life, we turn into chicken shits. We don't resist anything, we don't speak out. The people who are oppressed are usually the ones who dare to stand up for it. So yeah, it's definitely an audience that should be receptive to the idea of self-ownership and stuff like that. Any undercover cops want to take a shot at me? So that's my rant, if nobody else has anything to scream at me. I hate roads. They're flat and... Hovercraft! What? Hovercraft. Heck with roads. Give me a hovercraft. Well, thank you very much for not lynching me, and I'll see you later.
Picked up an angel whose left wing was broken. I sewed him together with some string and a vision. He raised his right hand and he gave me an answer. My mouth opened wide and I asked many questions. I see crowds of people all gathered around me. They all want the truth, but they don't want to hear it. I fear they will rob me if I dare to speak it. But poverty bears the fruit of the prophet. And oh, I am nothing